Hi everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to do a video about the HOLO Audio May KTE DAC. Now quite a few of you have asked me to give my thoughts in relation to this DAC, and some of you have asked me to compare it and the Playback Designs MPD-8. So I'm going to give you some thoughts around what I find appealing about this DAC, what I find appealing about the MPD-8, and some of the comparisons between the two, and we'll see where we go with that. So first thing I want to say about this DAC is it is the best Chinese DAC I've ever heard, hands down. And I've heard most of the DACs that come out of China in varying systems and over time, and this thing beats all of them to my ears without a doubt. It is just an exceptionally good DAC. So much so that I've actually owned this DAC about a bit over a year ago. I sold it, and I bought it about a year earlier than that. So things come in and out and go through my system relatively regularly. I get a good opportunity to have a listen to them as I've moved up through the stages to be where I'm at now. Obviously, my tuning of equipment is slowing down quite dramatically now because I'm at a point where my system gives me goosebumps. It still has my jaw in my my lap, but this stayed in my system for quite some time. It was really a step above anything I'd had before it, and it took some time to find a DAC that I thought bettered it. So I've got some notes here, so I'm just looking down for the notes. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. The build quality of this thing is absolutely outstanding. It really is very, very good. The way it's built, the way it's put together. It is solid aluminium construction, housing like pieces of that are bolted together. But really it is a cut above the rest that come out of China as far as I'm concerned. It's quite heavy too, by the way. I'm not exactly sure of the weight, but it is substantially heavy. You pick the thing up, the power supply is the heaviest part of it, obviously. But the architecture inside this unit, and I urge you to have a look on their website, it's just, they really should have a Perspex lid on this thing because it's that pretty to look at inside. But they don't. But certainly if you get a chance, if you haven't already, to have a look at internal pictures of this, it's worth just looking at purely for its architectural design. It really is exceptionally good. I think one of the things that I'm finding about this DAC when I owned it, and it's only been reinforced since I've advised Paul to buy this DAC, is that it takes about half an hour when you fire it up before it really feels like it's coming into its stride. It gets relatively warm when it's running. It does sound a little bit less resolved, would be the best way to describe it, in that first 30 minutes of operation. Then all of a sudden it just seems to get a little sweeter, a little more in focus, and it just sounds like that DAC that, plenty's been said about this DAC around the world. Plenty of people have reviewed it. And I'm not going to go into the total ins and outs of everything because that's already been done and you could see that somewhere else. My reviews are going to be more about how I find a piece of equipment. And then maybe if you ever get a chance to have a listen to it, you can sort of go, yeah, actually that's sort of how I hear it as well. And then that's how you'll understand where my ears are at and how I find things. So that's certainly worth mentioning. About half an hour before it really does start to feel like it's really good. So its ability, and this has been said elsewhere as well, but its ability to be able to place instruments in the soundstage, that is an absolute brilliant thing this DAC does. It really has this ability to place instruments across the soundstage where they are recorded. It also has this opportunity, or this ability, to give good air around the players in the soundstage. So you can very easily pinpoint out things that have been engineered that way. so that when an engineer, a mixing engineer sits down and goes, this is what we want to do with it, we want to put this person here and that person there, and this is how we want it to translate when people listen to it. This DAC does that very, very well. Really, really, first class ability to be able to do that. It has wonderful, wonderful detail, this DAC, but it's not fatiguing. To my ears, it certainly doesn't sound fatiguing. It's got a lovely, almost sweetness to it, but also with really, really lovely articulation of the details in the recording. That's another absolute positive point for this DAC. There's a lot of settings on this DAC, a lot of things that you can change, oversampling and non-oversampling, DSD. There's a lot of different things that you can play around with on this DAC, but by far and away, and this has been said as well, and I agree with it completely, the NOS setting, so the non-oversampling setting, is by far and away the where this DAC sounds its absolute best. It's where it really has that ability to be resolved, detailed, and not fatiguing in any way. Some of the other settings I find a little muddy sounding, a little too treacly sounding, and I just didn't like them. It just sounded smeared. Whereas on the non-oversampling section of this DAC, or sitting on this DAC, that cleared up and everything became beautifully focused, but still had that lovely sweetness, almost analog sound, which is exactly what a DAC is supposed to do: convert a digital signal into an analog one. So that is definitely something worth mentioning. As I said, I've owned this DAC and sold it on, but when this came up for sale on the second-hand market, I said to Paul, the owner of it, that he should buy that DAC. He was thinking about buying a spring DAC. This ended up coming up for sale, and I without any hesitation said, you buy that DAC. That is the DAC you want to buy. I think this thing is exceptionally good value for money. I think it is absolute great bang for your buck at its asking price. But when you can find one occasionally on the second-hand market for, $2,000 or $3,000 under that asking price, it again goes further to emphasizing the absolute bang for your buck you get from this DAC. So that is absolutely a notable point. It really is up there with it. It holds its own. Honestly, holds its own with DACs 2-3 times its value, its asking price. It will compete with those, and in some areas it even betters some of those things, just with its sweetness and its openness that this DAC presents, which I think is wonderful. So that probably is the best way to describe, how I feel about it. It's certainly, as I said, not fatiguing. It's not over the top in the upper frequencies. It's got a lovely, lovely mid-range band that just is believable and really, really nice, and it has great bass weight. Its bass weight is tremendous, very, very good for that. So it really is a good all-round DAC that satisfies what I think most people want to hear in a DAC. Now, I guess if we want to compare this, and this is difficult, if we want to compare this to the Playback Designs MPD-8, we are talking about completely different price points. I think this is somewhere around about a $10,000 DAC. The MPD-8 is around a $40,000 DAC thereabouts in this country. So as good as the May KTE is, the MPD-8 is the best sounding DAC I have ever heard. All of the big makers, I've heard them all, and when I was researching to decide where I wanted my reference to be, what I considered my reference for digital to analog conversion, and I came backwards and forwards, and I think I told a story about how I sat in a room blindfolded and an analog source was played, and then the digital source was played, and we swapped between records and tape and the DAC, the same piece of music, and I picked the DAC thinking that was the analog source. And very rarely do I get things wrong like that, especially as a sound engineer. I usually know, when things are what things are when I hear them. But I laughed. I sat in the chair when that blindfold was taken off, and I laughed my head off because I was absolutely fooled. It converts ones and zeros into an analog waveform better than any other DAC I have ever heard, hands down. And its ability to be able to convert high-res stuff into a form that literally, on a highly resolving system, and I'm lucky to have one, makes you almost believe that the artists are in your room. It is that good at understanding the weight of a human voice, the three-dimensionality of the vocal presentation in a recording with that DAC is mind-blowingly good. It as I said, other DACs I've heard that are 2, 3, 4 times that DAC's price sound digital. They actually don't do what the title suggests, D to A converter. It converts a digital signal into an analog, something we can listen to, but it still sounds digital to me. It doesn't have that warmth and that resolution that high-end audio in an analog form should have. That DAC does that. The other thing that I find absolutely outstanding about that DAC is everything it sees, it converts into 2 times DSD. And Andreas Koch, the designer of this DAC, has a secret sauce, if you like. His algorithm, his way of doing that conversion, which is not lossy in any way, shape, or form. But what you get with 2 times DSD, by the way, is the absolute sweet spot as far as DSD is concerned, as far as I've listened to as well. I think 1 times DSD can be a little bit muddy on some recordings. 4 times DSD doesn't really sound much different to me than 2 times DSD, but it's a much more data intensive audio stream. 2 times DSD just seems to be almost like the out of the 3 beds you lay in, it's the most comfortable one. It just sounds right. It sounds believable. And so everything that comes into that DAC, the MPD-8 goes out of it as a 2 times DSD analog signal. And so I can play things like Spotify, which is a lossy format. It does the conversion, and I can play that back in my system, and I can also then play the same track on Qobuz, and I can hear almost no difference in the sound that I'm getting. It has this uncanny way of just being able to do what it does, which I will never understand, nor do I want to. It has this ability to be able to do such a thing that just is mesmerizing every time I hear it. So that's a comparison in between these two. As good as this is, this HOLO Audio May KTE, the Playback Designs is another level. We're talking about a different level of DAC, as you would expect. This is the remote for the MPD-8. It's it's a fully metal remote control. It's quite heavy versus the remote for the KTE. So it's a little bit. It still is a very quality remote. It's a metal remote, an aluminium remote, but obviously you can see the functionality difference between these two remotes. This thing, you can pretty much do everything with it. This particular one, you can perform basic commands with it, which is fine and probably all you need. But out of the two remotes, I just like the hand feel of the MPD-8 remote as well. It just has a lovely feel in your hand. It's rounded on the edges. This is more sharper on the edge, and it just feels a little bit like like a credit card in your hand, so to speak, as opposed to this thing which just sort of fits in your hand really nicely. So that's definitely worth mentioning. A little bit about what you hear from the MPD-8. As I said, I play records on a fairly decent record playing device as well, and then I play the same stuff on digital, and I hear very little difference. I get the transient sweeps from the digital signal, and whatever it is, whatever is being fed into it, what I'm hearing back out of it, that ability to have that explosion of sound when it's there, and then those quiet passages when they're there. almost identical, you know, in that ability for between the turntable, the analog source, and what I'm streaming through the DAC. It just ticks all my boxes. As I said, I've worked as a sound engineer. I've been in tracking rooms. I've heard how things should sound when there literally are analog being captured on tape, and I get that feeling that what I'm hearing out of that DAC sounds it reminds me of those days when I was doing that, and no other DAC has come close to making me feel the same thing I feel when I listen to music through that DAC. So again, we are talking about very different price points. We are talking about you know, also a different sound. But in saying that, this comes closer than it has any right to come. And again, it was my liking of this DAC that for the reason that I purchased it. And then as I've evolved and seen what else is out there and what can be better than that, as I said, I settled on the MPD-8, and I couldn't be happier with it. But anyway, that's my thoughts on the comparison between the two. That's I regard this DAC highly. If you are interested in something that does what I'm explaining, then I've not heard a better DAC than this DAC, and by far and away, it is the best Chinese DAC on the market. It is still the gold standard to this day, and it's been out for a while now. It still is the gold standard to my liking. So that is my thoughts there. A little quick update. Things are moving along really nicely with the OAD Ultra Fidelity power preamp combination. I've been offering some different cables up to the amplifier. I'm hearing differences. I had a comment from a fellow saying that he preferred the Robertson cable set up on there first and foremost. I'm now trying some Kimber cable in the system, both speaker cable and interconnect cable as well. I'll talk a bit further about that when I'm doing the review on these products. I've got lots to say about these products, so stay tuned for that. That's coming up. There's plenty of other things that I want to talk about that are coming up soon. So please stay tuned. Please keep listening. Please like and subscribe and give me a thumbs up. We're pushing forward, getting close to 300 subscribers, and I'm really loving doing this for you, and I want to continue it, but I need your help. So please give me a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing. It's bye for now.